the leaders of 14 European countries and the United States met at a conference. The aim of the conference was for Western countries to avoid warring among themselves over Africa. The superpowers wanted to ensure maximum control over Africa's resources by establishing rules by which to divide the spoils at the expense of the Africans who rightly own them.
Hey there, Breakdown family. Today, we're traveling back to a moment in history that changed everything. A moment so chilling, so outrageous, that its effects are still felt across Africa today. The year was 1884. The place, Berlin, Germany. And inside a grand European hall, behind closed doors, the future of an entire continent was being decided. No, not by Africans, not with African input, but by European powers, slicing Africa up like a cake, each claiming pieces for themselves, with no regard for the people, the cultures, or the histories that lived there. Today on The Breakdown, we're exposing the shocking truth about what really happened inside the Berlin Conference, who started it, who was at the table, and who was not, and how the decisions made there brutally shaped Africa's borders, its conflicts today, its economy, and its destiny. And we're going even further. We'll also look at how, in many ways, the spirit of the Berlin Conference is still alive today in the modern scramble for Africa's land, its minerals, and its future. Because this is the story they never taught us. This is the story we need to understand if we ever hope to reclaim our power. Now, before we dive in, I want to invite you to be a part of something bigger. Because here at Pen Genius TV, we're building more than just a channel. We're creating a home, a global home for Black stories that are told with truth, with care, and with power. And if that speaks to you, and I hope it does, hit subscribe, tap the bell, drop a super thanks, and consider joining our membership community where you will get exclusive videos, behind-the-scenes conversation, and the chance to be part of the dialogue shaping our future. This isn't just content. It's a movement, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Now let's get into it. So to understand how we even got to the Berlin Conference, you have to know the real story, not the sanitized version they put in the textbooks. The conference wasn't about peace, no. It wasn't about progress. It was about power. And yes, greed.
A colony that made many European states compete with each other, vie with each other to accumulate colonies in order to make them great.
In the early 1880s, Europe was in a frenzy over Africa. They called it the scramble for Africa. And that's exactly what it was. A race to grab land, resources, and markets before anyone else could. King Leopold II of Belgium played a major role in sparking the urgency. Behind the scenes, he was desperate to legitimize his personal control over the Congo, a territory he claimed under the fake banner of humanitarian work, but was really setting up for brutal exploitation. At the same time, Germany, under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, was becoming a new rising power in Europe. Bismarck didn't even care about Africa initially, no, but he saw an opportunity. He realized that by calling a conference, Germany could establish itself as a diplomatic leader in Europe and use Africa as a bargaining chip in bigger European rivalries. So according to historians, it was Bismarck who organized the Berlin Conference, officially under the banner of bringing order to Africa. But the real goal was to prevent wars between European powers over African territory while carving it up in ways that served their own interests. Now here's the part that will never sit right. Not a single African leader, not a single African king, not a single African voice was invited to that table. that dinner table. 14 countries attended: Germany, France, Britain, Belgium, Portugal, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, Austria-Hungary, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and the United States. But not one African nation had a say. Well, it's not really a surprise, is it? You can't exactly invite the person you're planning to conquer to the party, can you? Now, they talked about Africa as if it was empty land, property to be negotiated, divided, and sold. A place without history, without governments, without civilizations worth respecting, without people worth listening to. And my people, that right there tells you everything you need to know about the real foundations of the colonial system that would come after. It was never about partnership. It was about conquest, extraction, and control, dressed up in the language of civilization. So what actually happened inside that room? For 3 straight months, from November 1884 to February 1885, European leaders sat around a series of grand tables, maps spread out before them like a feast. They negotiated, they argued, they made deals. But they all agreed on one thing: Africa was theirs for the taking.
So they sat around a table amicably, without the presence of any African, it must be pointed out, and they consulted amongst themselves in order to decide on the rules for occupation.
The result was the General Act of Berlin, a document that set the ground rules for how European powers could claim African land. First, it introduced something called the principle of effective occupation, which basically said you couldn't just plant a flag and call it yours anymore. You had to show that you could actually control the territory with military force, administration, and trade. In theory, it was supposed to make things fairer between European nations. But in reality, it kicked off a violent race to invade, conquer, and occupy as much of Africa as possible, no matter the cost to the people living there. The act also guaranteed free trade in certain regions, but again, not for Africans. It was free trade for European merchants, corporations, and governments to extract whatever resources they wanted: gold, rubber, ivory, copper, cocoa, you name it. They also agreed on freedom of navigation along major African rivers like the Congo and Niger. Again, not to help Africans travel or trade, but to make it easier for European powers to ship out goods and troops. When the conference ended in 1885, Africa was on the path to being completely divided. In less than 30 years, over 90% of the continent would be under European control. Ancient kingdoms collapsed. Families were torn apart by artificial borders. Rival ethnic groups were jammed into the same colonies, sowing divisions that would explode into conflict decades later.
Should be seen on a spectrum, on a continuum of plunder, pillage, and rape that all the European powers engaged in, but they engaged in at varying degrees and at varying levels. And the most horrific exemplar of the violence of colonialism is Congo.
And it all started right here, not on African soil, but in a European conference room, where Africa's fate was decided without a single African voice in the room. My people, when we talk about Africa's struggles today, we simply can't forget this, because the wounds that were opened in Berlin still bleed into our politics, our economies, our societies today. And it's painful to watch.
The huge basin of the Congo River in Central Africa is extraordinarily endowed with vast resources. This land, 2.5 million square kilometers, crisscrossed by navigable waterways, was extraordinarily rich in natural resources, brimming with coveted commodities like ivory, palm oil, timber, and copper. This region was also blessed with huge quantities of another highly valuable substance, rubber. Advances in the vulcanization of rubber made it more durable and less brittle, facilitating the invention of the pneumatic tire. Soon, rubber would become one of the most sought-after resources on the planet. The ancient rubber vines that grew wild over the equatorial rainforests of Congo had long been exploited by the custodians of this land. But now, outsiders were intent on plundering them. Following the Berlin Conference, Congo Basin was recognized as the possession of its sole owner, the King of the Belgians, Leopold II. Renaming it the Congo Free State, Leopold now personally controlled a territory 76 times the size of his home country.
Since childhood, one of the things he had craved was a colony. And so he created one for himself. And he did it by convincing other European leaders that he was going to spread Christianity and bring in, quote-unquote, civilization to the people.
King Leopold II's interests in the Congo were largely underpinned by enormous greed. And as a result of that greed, the Belgian Congo became the personal, private property of the King of Belgium. And the discovery of rubber became a godsend to King Leopold II.
Leopold ordered the rubber to be collected as fast as possible. Soon, vast areas were stripped of every single rubber vine. The mindless plundering of the land for its resources was repeated all across Congo Free State, the profits going into the pockets of one man, Leopold II. The environmental damage was only a tiny part of the story.
The damage caused by the Berlin Conference didn't end in 1885. It set off a chain reaction that Africa is still trying to heal from today. When those European powers drew lines across the continent, they didn't care about Africa's kingdoms, cultures, or communities. They didn't care that one line might cut straight through an ethnic group, separating families and villages across different colonial borders. They didn't care that they were forcing rival groups with centuries of tension between them, into the same artificial countries overnight. They carved up Africa for their own convenience, and we're still living with the consequences. Today, so many of Africa's conflicts in places like Sudan, Congo, Nigeria, and beyond can be traced back to those colonial borders that forced different nations and peoples into the same fragile states, borders that made unity almost impossible from the start. You see, the Berlin Conference didn't just redraw the map. It ripped apart Africa's political, social, and economic foundations. It locked Africa into an economic model where raw materials, gold, oil, cocoa, cobalt, were extracted and shipped overseas, while African economies remained dependent and underdeveloped. It stripped away sovereignty, dignity, and control, leaving behind a legacy of exploitation, instability, and division. And perhaps the most brutal of all, this was no accident. It was by design. The goal was never to build Africa, y'all. The goal was to break Africa, to weaken it enough so it could be controlled, exploited, and profited from indefinitely. And when we talk about poverty, conflict, or underdevelopment in Africa today, we have to understand the Berlin Conference lit the fuse. The explosion is still echoing through history. So my people, hey, here's the hard truth we face today and that we continue to have to grapple with as Africans. The Berlin Conference may have ended in 1885, but the mentality behind it, the idea that Africa is a prize to be divided, exploited, and controlled, it never really went away. Today, we're witnessing a new scramble for Africa, a scramble not with flags and armies, but with loans, mining contracts, security partnerships, and trade deals. China is building massive infrastructure projects across the continent through the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia is sending military contractors, striking mineral deals, and expanding its political footprint from Mali to Sudan. The United States is stepping up military aid and mineral agreements, trying to counter Russian and Chinese influence. Europe is still deeply entangled through old colonial ties, especially in West and Central Africa. And nowhere was this more clear than in a recent U.S. Senate hearing we broke down right here on the breakdown, where top generals openly, without shame, discussed Africa, no, not as a partner, not as a rising force, but a strategic battlefield, a place to outmaneuver China and Russia, a region to secure resources, ports, and influence for their own global advantage.
We had a whole of government approach in some of the challenges on the African continent, and we used that in past years. Now, given that USAID and a number of capabilities are being folded under the State Department, we continue to look at ways to be able to leverage that in U.S. government pressure on especially our competitors in achieving our strategic goals. So I am seeing that, there's a number of programs that we see that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to replicate. They can't do what we do. They can't do what we do in PEPFAR, where they extended the life span of a number of Africans by 20 years. They're trying to replicate that. They're trying to match what we do. So that's what we're seeing as we start to fold in the capabilities of USAID under State Department. China's trying to exploit that scene.
Okay, well, you can't imagine how frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to move to a utilization of the resources to benefit the people there. After all this time, it's a puzzle that we haven't unwound up.
Everywhere you look, powerful nations are once again rushing to stake their claims. They are after Africa's cobalt, its lithium, its oil, its gold, its farmland again, the very lifeblood of the future economy. And once again, far too often, Africa's voice, the voice of its people, its movements, its visionaries, is being drowned out in the noise of foreign interest, just like it was in Berlin. So the methods have changed, the language has changed, but the underlying dynamic, the fight to control Africa's wealth without empowering Africa's people, remains dangerously familiar. And if we don't recognize it, if we don't name it and confront it, history is bound to repeat itself once again. So, my people, where do we go from here? The Berlin Conference, it reminds us of one brutal truth. When you are not at the table, you are on the menu. In 1884, Africa wasn't just ignored, it was carved up without consent, without respect, without mercy. And today, as a new scramble for Africa unfolds, we have to ask ourselves the hard question: will history repeat itself? Will Africa once again be treated as a prize to be fought over by outsiders? Or will this generation, our generation, stand up, speak up, and reclaim the right to write our own story? This time, will it be different? Because the choice is not just in the hands of foreign powers. It's in the hands of African leaders. It's in the hands of African citizens. It's in the hands of all of us, you watching, the descendants of this history, the witnesses to this moment, the allies who want to see Africa rise. Because maybe just like this senator, you don't understand why this continent that is rich with so much still hasn't been able to use that wealth to the benefit of its people. We must demand real partnership, not just new masters. We must demand sovereignty, not just aid. We must demand a future where Africa is not the battleground for someone else's empire, but the architect of its own destiny. So here's my question to you, my people. If you could say one thing, just one thing to African leaders today, one thing to your president, your lawmakers, your institutions, what would you say? Now, I know you all are my people, so I know you probably have more than one thing to say. Drop them all in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Let's build, let's reflect, let's keep pushing for something better. Because the more we talk about it, the more we change history, we change the future. So I can't wait to hear from you. And if this episode sparks something in you, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the notification bell. Because here at The Breakdown, we're not just watching history happen. No, we're breaking it down. We're learning from it. And we are using it to fight for the future that we deserve. And if you want to go deeper with us, consider joining our growing membership community or dropping a super thanks to support our work. I can't wait to connect with you there. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sandra Babu-Boateng. Until next time, take care. Hey you! Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.